we're I think live and on track to get going with this Saturday morning session of the Moses Collaborative Conference. It's been an amazing week in terms of the content that has been presented. It's quite remarkable how Moses has taken this vibrant annual event that people came together to be part of in Wisconsin and turned it into something that is virtual. And there's a lot of work involved with the organizers in doing this, and I want to thank them for that. This morning, we're going to have Jude Becker being part of our session on profitable pig flow for the organic and pasture-based producer. I've known Jude, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years, maybe more than that.
Oh, longer than that, 20 years, Gary. So
okay.
The very first pork niche market working group meetings. Yeah.
That was 2001. Interesting.
Yeah.
Jude began raising organic hogs on his family farm near Dyersville in 1999. When he finished his undergraduate degree at Iowa State. He has 100 sows. They're kept in a batch farrowing system that he uses to do pig flow through the operation, and all the hogs are finished out on his farm. Using corn, organic corn that he grows right there on the farm, and the pork is then marketed to retail stores and further processors in the United States as well as Hong Kong and Japan under the Jude Farm label, which is a remarkable accomplishment. Let me tell you that. So, but we're really happy to have Jude with us today. And Jude's going to go ahead and get his PowerPoint up and going. What I'm going to tell you is that as an attendee, there is a Q and answer section in the attendee portion of the presentation where you can type in the questions that you might have for Jude. We're going to feed those to Jude, but we're going to wait until the end of the session to be able to do that. So Jude's going to take about an hour or so to go through his slides, to talk about his presentation, and then there'll be about half an hour at the end that we can do our Q's and A's. So please give us your, let's make this dynamic for Jude. He's going to be talking into a vacuum, but he knows that you're all out there. So with that in mind, Jude, thank you so much for doing this, and go ahead and get your screen shared.
Thanks, Gary.
Yep.
Okay, so I've got the PowerPoint open, and it was, so I need to get to Zoom again.
Yep.
And hit share screen.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep, I'm seeing it.
All right, now I'm going to do this.
Okay, there you go.
From beginning. Okay, can you see it, Gary? My presentation?
Yeah, your first slide is looking good.
Okay, super. We were a little worried about that, everyone. I don't do these PowerPoints every day, but so anyway, yeah. My name is Jude Becker, and I have a farm here in Dyersville, and I'm just so glad to be able to share some stuff about our farm on a great, bright, cheery, sunny Saturday morning. As a farmer, I'll tell you, you don't realize how much the polar vortex drags you down physically and emotionally and on every level until it warms up again. And then you realize my energy level's rising. I don't know why that is. Well, it's because I was just going through a kind of hell. So we've made it through the most recent polar vortex once again. And yeah, looking forward to spring coming here on the farm. And so we'll talk about pigs today, and we'll talk about sows and reproduction. Because I really think that, based on the calls I get sometimes from people who are hoping to start a small swine enterprise, that there really is very little information for them, and just at least there's the information that's out there is sort of sporadic and spread all over the place and not complete. So what I'm going to do today is kind of go through a thought process or a sort of framework of how I would make decisions if I were planning to start a small pig farm from scratch. So some of you that already have some pigs or whatever, I still think this has lots of value because it just goes through the the rationale that I've learned, the rationale that I use now when I make decisions here on sort of these bigger planning things. So we're going to talk about obviously acquiring breeding stock like gilts or boars, how to think about that. And then I'll imagine that if you have those things acquired, you need to think about breeding schedules, which then correlate to work schedules. And finally, ultimately, farrowing will result, and how to manage that. So that's kind of how we'll organize this little talk. And then at the end, there'll be some time for questions. So please keep your questions or write them down, and we'll use the time at the end. So for gilt selection, the first thing you need to think about, obviously, is if you decided to have pigs on your farm, then what breed are you going to keep? So this is a big topic that I've read about a lot, and people have asked me about it, and I've heard everyone's opinions. And at the end of the day, I think that there might be a little bit too much focus on breeds. Because I've learned that, I put it this way, there's as much variation within breeds as between breeds. So that means, let's just say Chester Whites, for example. I have Chester Whites on my farm. There are Chester Whites, and then there are Chester Whites, and then there are Chester Whites. In other words, the bone structure, the width of shoulder, lung capacity, ham size, percent lean in terms of carcass leanness, mothering ability, you name it. There's a huge variation. So if you were to say to me, well, Chester Whites are the thing to do because of X, I would say to you, well, you really ought to check out the actual farm where you're planning to get those gilts from, because they could be influenced by a variety of breeds, 5 or 10 or 20 generations back, when that specific multiplier site began to create their own herd, their grandparent herd. So you really have to do your homework in terms of visiting these places and looking at the animals, seeing what they look like. So I really can't recommend any specific breeds because of that reason. And you need to decide for yourself what types of breeds you want on your farm. So for me, that decision has been to choose a mix of meat quality and production efficiency traits. So because I'm selling pork under my own label, therefore I want to create a kind of culinary regard, let's say, for the meat that is sold and given to my customers. So we should think about meat quality. So that means looking at loin eye data for the gilts you're buying, if the farmer has any. Percent lean might be something you would look at. Things like that. And just asking people if someone's eaten meat from that place, did it taste good? I know Nyman Ranch simply has the simple pork chop taste test, where they simply taste the meat to sort of, it's one of their final things that maybe cuts through all the fancy data, so to speak.
So Jude, real quick question. You got Chesters, and what's your other mix that goes in there?
So Berkshire is our sire. This Berkshire Boar, American Berkshire. And so I was just talking about the meat quality, but the production efficiency is also very important, because I feel like that the community of responsible meat eaters has to face this question of how can you make the case for red meat, not just pork, but red meat, in a world in which carbon and questions about climate are becoming more and more central to our life. So production efficiency is very important, because you need to make the case that I'm using resources efficiently as a farmer to produce meat. And in terms of pigs, that means you just can't escape pigs per sow per year. So you have to have a sow who can, first of all, get pregnant most of the time when you want her to be pregnant. And then you have to have a sow which can get, at least 10 piglets born alive and vigorous, robust piglets that can survive the first 48 hours of their life. And then you need a sow whose body condition allows her to milk those piglets out to a longer window of time. Because remember, most of us are going to be going to 6 weeks or more in terms of a lactation duration. So finally, I'll just say, always beware of the latest cool heritage breed, because I hear this so often from chefs and people hoping to sell pork to chefs and restaurants, but it could be any market, not to pick on chefs, but, oh, Jude, we've got this new thing that someone got from England. It's amazing. They were around 300 years ago. And oh my goodness, it's going to be so cool. It's whatever. I've heard that about Gloucester Old Spots and other things. Someone called me one time with a middle white pig, which apparently existed 100 years ago in England. But people like that tend to have bad results. I'll just put it that way. I've heard stories about these Iberico pigs coming from Spain, and please beware of that, because there's very little data or track record of the right production traits. So again, at my farm, we have the American Berkshire boar and a Chester White influenced female. So my sows are not pure Chester Whites. They are Chester Whites with some Landrace or even some large white mixed into them, because I found having a pure Chester White just reduced our ability to get pigs live born at the right levels. So it was a bit of a philosophical compromise there, because I was hoping to have a pure Chester White female herd here, but over time it hasn't proven to be very practical. So once you decide all that, then you need to figure out how you're going to serve your pigs, or how you're going to, are you going to do artificial insemination, or are you going to use boars, basically, or are you going to use both? You can do both. And so I'll go through a few of the benefits and the pros and cons of each one here. So for AI, you're going to have a lot more control over your breeding, because you have known semen quality. That means if you bought the semen, or if you collected it yourself, you can look with a microscope every day. You can verify that the semen is in fact viable today, right now, this very moment, when I'm going to go breed. Because so many times, if you're using a boar, you just have to kind of guess, well, he's healthy and looks good, so I guess the semen's okay. But because I've collected semen from my boar many times, I know that's not always true. And so I'm sure that you will have a higher conception rate by using AI if you follow the correct procedures, because you can rule that out. So also in terms of AI, you have you can rather than having the cost of maintaining a boar on your farm, you can just buy the semen in when you want it. In other words, if you're breeding sows every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks, you don't have to worry about feeding a boar every day, even though you don't need the boar to breed today, right? And when the time comes, you can extend one boar's sperm over many sows rather than having to buy and keep many boars. Because, for example, if you're breeding 20 sows or 10 sows in a group, one boar is not enough to do that. As you know, you need multiple boars. So for me, it's just been a simple decision to use AI. And if you feel uncomfortable about doing that, I know when I first started doing this, my vet helped me a few times, and it was less difficult than I anticipated it was going to be. And the more I did it, it just became a habit. And so I wouldn't be intimidated by a lack of confidence in your technique. So that's why I'm kind of rooting for AI. And when people ask me, I tell them that. But of course, you can use boars. There are some times where a boar may be more advantageous in terms of, it requires less intervention. You can sort of, if you have a good boar, you can just turn him into the pen and walk away almost. And for us, we still sometimes do that with gilts, because getting gilts to come into heat in terms of a visible, detectable heat by humans can be challenging. So we have boars to help us do that. And so we either use the boar to sort of stimulate and play with the gilts for maybe 30 to 40 or even an hour before we want to do AI. And that really helps the gilts to be more, their heats can be more confirmed in terms of detectable by humans. And if that doesn't work, then we will actually just let the boar breed the gilt. So yeah, otherwise I'll just talk a little bit about, you know, boars are a little dangerous sometimes, so you need to be aware of that. I mean, I can attest to that, especially if you have more than one boar and they get together, you need to be really careful about that. And of course, once a year, you should get your vet to help you trim your boar's tusks, and that needs to be done correctly with the kind of wire that is used, like, I think it's called piano wire. And so, you know, never try to do that on your own, or never try to use like side cutters or pliers or anything like that. Just, it's better to get a vet to help you do that. So when the gilts arrive on your farm, well, my second bullet point is really should be the first one here, but it's basically that you have to do a really good job communicating with your gilt multiplier. In other words, the farmer selling you the gilts about what he's done in terms of vaccines and what his disease history has been, because that's a big deal. Because you're bringing in, if you have a clean farm, you need to realize that you're bringing in the disease profile, all the pathogens that exist on that farm are now coming to your farm. And there's no way to avoid that when you bring gilts in. So it's really important to discuss this with the farm who's going to be selling you gilts in the beginning. And maybe they've done some vaccines on their own, for example. You know, they may have their own vaccine protocol. Typically anymore, I find that they minimize the vaccines given, and then that burden is on you as the farmer to vaccinate them when they arrive. And also parasite presence, because I know many of these niche programs have an increasing restriction on things like ivermectin and wormers. So you really want to avoid bringing in especially mange and lice, because you don't have to bring that in. And if you have a multiplier farm that has, you know, mange and lice, you really want to think twice about buying anything from them, because they should be able to prove to you that they don't have that. Because once you bring it on your farm, it's very difficult to get rid of, especially if you're not able to use ivermectin. And then you need to start thinking about dates on the calendar, because you want to think about, okay, if the gilts arrive on the 1st of March and we want to breed on the 1st of April, or you need to start planning way ahead. And this is something that takes practice, because it sounds easy to do this, but most people don't do it for some reason, and I'm guilty of that. I took me years before I could really plan out these dates, because like my first point says, 35 weeks is about the right time. So you want to make sure you get the gilts in before that. So in other words, I've always been taught breed on the second heat after arrival. So if the gilts arrive to your farm and they come in heat from transport, perhaps 3 to 5 days later, that's the first heat. You don't want to breed on that heat. You want to breed on the second heat. So that's almost a month after they arrive. But remember, 35 weeks is the ideal age to breed. So again, you should talk to the farmer selling you the gilts to ask him the age. So now you need to think about your business plan. So how many pigs do you want to raise? How many pigs do you need to raise? How many pigs do your customers want? How many pigs can you sell? Do you have confidence in being able to sell pork every week, every month? Maybe you have you're selling into a pool of farmers, so that decision is not on your shoulders. But still, this question has to be answered. I think it's the first question really, is what is the size of your market, basically, and how stable is your market? So for me, I'll just give you my example here. we are able to process, to slaughter and cut pork every 2 weeks. So that means I feel confident to be able to sell 50 pigs, the meat from 50 animals every 2 weeks. So that means if we're doing that 26 times a year, that means we need 1,300 pigs a year. And we need to feel confident that we can get that to not disappoint our customers. So therefore we have to organize some kind of a work schedule and a breeding schedule. And I would say this is one of the most central things in my farm over the last, my career in doing this is getting that perfected, because if that's not right, then you feel as though you're drowning in work, endlessly drowning in work. And that's one of the things that I know livestock farmers can get burnt out from, because it's like Christmas comes, holidays come and go, and you're just always doing chores and you're never done. It's always this sensation of just like you're drowning. That's the only thing I can relate it to. So again, why organize the schedule? It's not only the personal thing I just mentioned, but there are lots of economic reasons. And your customers want fresh meat. And this is something that can be hard, but I found that it's a big and complex world full of philosophical and moral conundrums, because I'd much rather produce pigs on a seasonal basis and do like my ancestors did, spring and fall farrowing, and have meat in the freezer and expect people to buy that meat because it is good meat. But try to tell that to chefs somewhere, or tell that to Hy-Vee or Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. They see it differently. They want fresh meat in their counter to sell. They want meat that looks like the meat in this picture every week or every 2 weeks, fresh. So that's just the reality we have to deal with. So you have to have a processor that's ready, and you have to be able to supply that processor with pigs every week or every 2 weeks or every month, because very few processors can exist and pay their staff and pay their bills to then process hogs for seasonal producers. They need producers who are continuously producing. So again, I know these things, these 3 points could probably make up, entire PowerPoint sessions, or entire conferences, but they may not jive with everything that every farm is doing. If you're doing a frozen program and you're seasonally producing pigs, hey, that's great. But I need to produce pork in a fresh and consistent way. So the workflow helps the farm. If you can create, like we do, we produce pigs on the next couple slides are going to be on our 6-week scheduling system. So having that steady flow 12 months of the year helps me in many ways. It helps me work with my lender, just trying to figure out cash flow needs, because cash flow needs are, instead of being, towering peaks and deep dark valleys, they tend to even out. In other words, your cash flow needs even out, which is nice every month to have this many bills to pay and have this much money coming in. It really makes farming more fun, I think. Labor planning, because once your farm gets to a certain point, like mine has, you can no longer rely on the guy there in the blue t-shirt to do all the work. You need to have somebody helping. So we have people at my farm that I'm very lucky to have that help me, and they also want steady work. They don't want to have winter off or have no chores to do. They want chores to do all the time. It's their job, and that makes sense. So it's steady employment. And also when you have your work planned out, you have I feel like you have a higher quality of life, because you know when you're going to be working hard and you know when you're not going to be working hard. So it's time off, and the awareness that at some point I can have some time off from my livestock, that gives you that feeling of being in control, and to avoid that drowning sensation like I was just mentioning. So here, before you can build this schedule I'm talking about, you need to decide the system parameters. And I know these are totally theoretical, but we still need, I feel like we ought to try to strive to achieve this theoretical stuff, even though you probably never totally get it right. It's livestock, it's Mother Nature, I get it. But for us, these numbers here are really critical, and they define everything. So we know that at my farm and most farms, that if you wean a sow or you take her piglets away from her, it takes about 5 days for her to come in heat. And once she's in heat and you breed her, and let's assume she's pregnant from that service, then she has a gestation period of 114 days. That's 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. And once the piglets are born, at my place, we have chosen to use a 6-week nursing time frame. So the pigs stay on the sow for 6 weeks, which is 42 days. So if you take all those numbers and add them together, that's 161 days or 23 weeks. So that's really important, because that means you know that in 23 weeks of time, one sow, or however many sows are bred at the same time as her, which create a batch of sows. So in that 23 weeks, that group of sows goes through the entire production cycle. So you can use that to plan out your farm. So how many sow groups do you want? So this is, and when I say groups, I don't mean, well, there are 5 sows in this pen and 5 sows in that pen, so that's 2 groups. I mean groups of sows in time. And that means how many sows were bred on week 7, or how many sows were bred in July, because they are grouped together in time. And you can therefore allocate economic resources and all of your resources towards that group. And you can measure your results from that group. So there are many pros and cons here. When I started farming, I didn't know any of this, and I just had pigs born in the spring from sows that were farrowed, or sows farrowed in early spring and bred around Christmas time, because that's what my grandpa and my dad had done for decades. And we did the same thing in the fall, spring and fall, and I never thought about this. But it turns out there's lots of details here that you can find some, I believe you can find some benefits from. So then one time we had more sows than we have now. And so about 10 years ago, if you would have asked me how many sows you have, I said, well, I have about 300 sows here, and we have groups. We have 8 groups of sows. So we have the bottom number, the bottom 8 groups of sows, and every 3 weeks is when we wean pigs. So that means out of the 8 groups, 1 group is coming through the system every 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks, one of those groups is farrowing. Every 3 weeks, one of those groups is being bred. Every 3 weeks, one of those groups is being weaned. And then we decided to change the farm as the farm got a bit smaller and our numbers of sows shrank. So now we have the top line. And I really like this one, and I think it's something I advocate for with a lot of people who call me, because I think it has so many benefits for a small to medium-sized farrow-to-finish operation. So it's having 4 groups of sows and doing the work every 6 weeks, planning one of those 4 groups to farrow every 6 weeks, 1 to be served, and so on. So over the right 3 columns of this slide sort of analyze positive and negative things about factors related to what I'm saying. So one factor is inclusion of return sows. So in other words, if you have a sow that's not pregnant after you serve her, and she returns 3 weeks later, because as we know, every 3 weeks sows come in heat. you're faced then with the conundrum of what do I do now? Because this sow is out of the schedule, right? So if she's out of the schedule, it means maybe she farrows at the wrong time and then her pigs aren't the right age and you have to find another place to house them and so on and so on. It just snowballs. So what I did in the past with the 8 groups and 3-week interval, I have 2 plus signs because it's really easy on that system to include sows who return, because every 3 weeks you have sows weaning. So therefore, any sow who returns from the previous group can automatically be available to just fall right into the current group. It's easy. So I'm not advocating to do that, though. I still think 4 groups is better. So that's a challenge. So I have a minus sign by the inclusion of return sows. So you need to decide that either one of 2 things, well, 3 things, but really the choices are, if a sow returns in this system, you can just cull her and say, okay, she returned, she shouldn't have returned, she has to be culled from the herd. I don't do that. What we do is if a sow returns, the other choice then would be to breed her anyway. But if you breed her anyway, she's out of the schedule, and then you need to make more pens and so on and so forth, which kind of sucks. So then the third choice is wait. And this takes discipline, because you don't want to wait. You're wasting time, and it's money to feed the sow every day. I get it. But I feel like if you wait 3 more weeks, then you're falling back. Again, that means 6 weeks has gone by. So you can then try to include them. Now, this doesn't work with all sows, and sometimes old sows who, if you skip them, they go anestrus. In other words, they just go out. They don't come and heat anymore ever again. But if the sow's that old, maybe you should cull her anyway. So that's something to think about, is the inclusion, how you're going to include sows who return in your schedule. Then the next thing is the number of weeks that are free. In other words, how many weeks do you have a low workload in this system? And one of the nice things about this 4 sow group things is you have a long period of what I call free weeks, or weeks without a lot of work. And what I used to do at the bottom with 8 sow groups, you only had 1 week free, because out of every 3 weeks, you have to farrow 1 week, serve 1 week, or breed 1 week, and wean 1 week. And that never stops. And the farrowing week, even though you're farrowing, and that's lots of work, it's still the least work of this, I would say. So there's really 1 or even no free weeks, you might say. So that sucks for your personal life, and your workers get tired too. So again, this 4 group 6 week system gives you 4 weeks free, and then 2 weeks of more intense work. And during those 4 weeks, you can fix machines, maintain stuff, you can build fence, you can do all kinds of stuff. You can take a vacation. It's great. So that's why I really like the 4 groups in 6 weeks. Now, one more thing to consider is the size of your group in terms of how it's using facilities. In other words, if you have lots of groups of sows, the more groups of sows you have, the more groups of pigs you have, and therefore you need more and more and more pens, small pens, but also you have an increasing turnover, let's say for your farrowing pens. They're being used all the time, and you don't need as many farrowing pens. But if you have only a few groups of sows on your farm, then you have to have more farrowing pens. In other words, let's make this more simple. If I have 50 sows and they farrow once a year, I need 50 farrowing pens, right? But if I divide them into 25 that farrow in the spring and fall, now I only need 25 farrowing pens. And so the further you cut that down, you follow where this is going. So these slides will be available later if you guys want to look at them and have more questions. So I'll keep going here. So the pigs that you then try to get per weaning need to match, like I said, 50 pigs every 2 weeks. If I can sell 50 pigs to my market every 2 weeks, and we already know that we're shooting for 1,300 pigs a year. So that means you need to think about how many sows you want. So if we can get from the 6-week system I just laid out, 8.6 weanings per year. Because if you take that many 6-week periods into 52 weeks, you get 8.6 weanings per year. And if we can get 151 pigs per weaning, then that will give us what we want, 1,300 pigs. So those 151 pigs, you need to calculate your farm's mortality. And so I consider that to be sort of like pigs who actually die, but also what I call tail enders. So pigs who've grown a bit slowly and maybe they'll never be big enough to sell. So you just have to calculate that that's going to happen. Plus any pigs you treat, because I'm not allowed to use antibiotics. So if I treat a pig, it can't go to my market. So that means we really need more than 151 pigs. We need 166 pigs in a group if we want to reach this goal of 50 pigs every 2 weeks to sell. So that means if we're getting about 8.5 pigs per sow, which is about what I can do reliably and steadily, and you need to decide based on your own experience how many pigs you can wean. That means your group of sows needs to be 19.5 pregnant sows ready to go to the farrowing area. So if you need 19.5 sows, assuming low sow death loss for us, that's about 2% or less per year. Now you need to figure out your conception rate. And this is something for me that's challenging. Maybe you may have read industry numbers which have 90% or something like that. But in my experience, that's a hard number to reach consistently because there's lots of PRRS in the Midwest. And for us, it's been a challenge. I'll just put it that way. So if we have an 80% conception rate, I feel pretty good over the long term. That means we need to get 19.5 sows, we need to have 24 sows in a group. And that means if we go back to what I said about 6 weeks and 4 groups, it means you need 96 active females in your herd. So that's a sort of lot of math to go through, but if you go through it, you can create, I feel like, a good consistent basis for knowing how many sows you need and knowing the rationale behind it. But to get 96 sows in a herd takes some time to build that up. So if you're buying gilts, this sounds, I've been criticized for saying this, but it's based on my experience and other people's experience that I've spoken to. So you take the number of sows that you need, which is 96, and you double it. Because many gilts who arrive at your farm just won't be able to successfully make it for 1 year, because either they don't come in heat, or they come in heat but they don't get pregnant, or then they get pregnant but they may abort, or they may then make it to farrowing and they may be these kind of gilts who just don't care about their pigs. And this happens. So I would really plan to get a lot of gilts more than you need, because to have too many gilts is a problem, but it's a much better problem than having not enough pigs to sell, because not enough pigs to sell will disappoint your customers if you have an established market right off the bat. It disappoints your lender, and it makes the whole project start under a kind of cloud of frustration, which is not healthy. So subsequent to that, though, I reduce it. So in the future, the more experience you get, you can, instead of doubling it, you can go down to like let's say 1.5. So it may be even less. So for example, now if I want 10 gilts pregnant, I might buy 13, because there's always that sort factor to sort of accept and then plan for. So the date to start your project, you need to figure out when your customers are ready to take meat, or when your processor is ready to butcher your hogs. And then you need to back up about a year, depending on how fast your pigs go to market. But remember something that's important, that all groups of market hogs are basically a bell curve, which consists of the oldest, healthiest, fastest growing pigs at the sort of right-hand side, bottom of the curve. And then most of the pigs are in the middle of the curve at the top. And then there's some slower growing pigs at the back end. So when I say 28 weeks to the top of the curve, that means from, let's say you're farrowing on week 1, which is the first week of the year. That means 28 weeks later, on my farm, those pigs are pretty much going to be in the process of being sold and ready to go to market. And that's a little bit slower than most indoor commodity farms are experiencing. But in my experience, using these kind of Berkshire heritage breeds and not using antibiotics and having outdoor access is going to produce about that result. So here's something, the next 3 slides are just as if you laid a calendar out, okay, for this work schedule we're talking about. In other words, the week number 1. So most people, if you've ever bought semen or boars or gilts from a large company, you get these, they'll ship you calendars once a year. And these calendars have week numbers. So week numbers are sort of what people in the swine industry use to plan out their reproduction, okay? And so when I say these groups, so if you talk about your sows are in 4 groups, like we said, then you may give the group number 1, you know, the number 1 on your record book or your computer software or whatever, and then you need to assign a week for that activity. So that's simply what I'm doing in these slides. And you can see on week number 1, which could be any week. Week 1 could be the first week you decide to start, you know, doing something. But in my case, week 1 is when the first sow group is weaned, okay? And on that week, in my 6-week 4 sow group system, you wean and farrow at the same week, and the subsequent week, which we could call week 2, you'll then serve the sows you weaned on week 1. And then there are, like we said, 4 weeks. So week 3, 4, 5, and 6 have less activities. Of course, you're still doing the watering and cleaning and everything, but less intense activities. And again, this schedule is available to you guys, and if you have more questions on it, I can certainly answer them. But just to skip ahead to the end of these weeks. So, like I said, it takes 23 weeks to go through the entire schedule. So on week 24, that means you're starting all over again with another group or another cycle, let's say. And again, just to say, once this schedule starts, it doesn't ever stop. So you need to be consistent. In other words, even though it's Christmas or New Year's and you don't feel like weaning the sows that day, you really need to try to wean them, because when you wean the sows, it fixes in time events in the future. And we really try to follow through this schedule all the time. And also, we wean on Thursday. And the reason you wean on Thursday is because that means you can then breed, you can do your serving on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. And I find that works really well. Just if you have people helping you on the farm, if you need something from your veterinarian's office, if you're going to go buy semen, it's to avoid weekends with some of these critical jobs. So weaning on Thursday means you're breeding on this following week on Monday, Wednesday, and Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So now we're getting to farrowing. And at my farm, we farrow outside. Now, I know in this far north in the Midwest, we've been sometimes criticized and told it's too cold and the winters are too hard, there's too much snow. But I started out farrowing in a wooden farrowing house with wooden pens and straw and heat lamps. And then I built a hoop structure that was more of a greenhouse / hoop structure about 16 or 17 years ago. And I spent lots of money, and it had a heated floor, and it was supposed to work great. And the problem I found from the get-go was, although the building was heated, that the environment was too wet. And in such a wet environment, you had too much moisture, too much, just frankly, from endless amounts of urine and defecation from the sows, right? So this caused the perfect environment for Clostridium and E. coli to develop. And then we were faced with the conundrum of, well, we have to treat these pigs, but we can't treat them. And so struggling with that for a couple seasons led me to look at outdoor farrowing. And it's something that I feel tells a good story. It gives a good image to the customer, and it can be done. Now, on the heels of this polar vortex, again, that wasn't easy for us, but working through this 2-week period of difficulty is something that I would choose over more frequent challenges, let's say, with these E. coli and Clostridium and piglets in heated farrowing houses. I think if I had to pick one over the other, I would choose this all the time. The way this works is because of the specific technology we use, the huts we have, which I can discuss here. So just this photograph just sort of shows we have lots of electric fence, 1 or 2 sows per paddock, never more than that if you can avoid it, because I've found that as the number of sows increase per farrowing pen, they get more competitive, their behavior changes, I think. And also we can manage them as individuals in this system, which is kind of like a dairy farm. One milk cow is treated as one milk cow, and I think a sow should be the same. You treat a sow as an individual. So before we farrow, we know, again, from our scheduling, we know the date to farrow, and we can move pregnant sows to the farrowing area 10 days prior to the due date. This is important because I know that they will adapt to their house. They will choose a house and go in there, make their nest ahead of time. And I'm convinced there are all sorts of maternal instinctive behaviors going on here that we don't really understand as humans, but they are important anyway. And also it's important at this time to bed the interior of the hut with straw. And we make it pretty deep. And it makes sure that all the corners are covered in straw so the wind isn't blowing in. And this is what we do 10 days before the farrowing date with a group of sows. So we move to these paddocks from wherever they were living during their gestation, which could be in the pasture or it could be in a hoop building. So here you can see my huts, which are steel, and they are galvanized steel on the inside and outside, and they have 2 inches of insulation. And they're pretty well made. I got them from a company in England. So feeding sows during this time. We are feeding, this is something that there are probably, many feeding plans, but here's what I do, and I'll explain why it is. And you can take my ideas and build your own plan, but you should really follow a plan to feed sows correctly, because I think lots of people take the view of just too many people. I shouldn't say lots, but from what I gather, too many people just throw some feed down, according to some generic website from some university that has a swine website. And you really need to be thinking more about it than that. So for example, here in the last month of gestation, the pregnancy, we give 7 pounds of feed of our gestation diet to small sows and gilts. And we give 8 pounds to sows who are a little bigger, and maybe they are older sows, and therefore they need a little more to maintain their body weight. And right before they farrow, we don't want to be giving too much feed. In other words, that, in my experience, might make farrowing problems. In other words, pigs are just a little too big, and then you have to sort of intervene and physically pull pigs, etc., which we want to avoid. So we cut the feed a little bit Tuesday of the farrowing week, because if you breed sows on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, you're always going to be farrowing on Thursday and Friday and Saturday. So on Tuesday, before that farrowing, we cut the feed. I think it helps. Then after the sow farrows, we start increasing the feed from nothing on the first day. We feed nothing on the first day. We let the sow in her house, and she just nurses her piglets with colostrum. Then the second day, we get the sow out of the house if she doesn't come up on her own. And we feed 2 pounds. And we increase this increment during the first week by 2 pounds a day. And then if she cleans up that 4 pounds, then we go to 6. And if she cleans up to 6, we probably get to 10. I try to get to 10 pounds after the first week has gone by. And from there, I keep increasing it. And so I feed sows manually in these single sow paddocks that I just explained. So I can watch this every day. And you need to have the same person doing this job every day, because you've got to know the sow and how much she's eating. And we keep increasing this until they get to be consuming 25 pounds per sow per day. And again, we use 1 sow if possible. In most cases, sometimes I have to use 2, but try to use 1 sow per farrowing pen to allow individual management. So,
hey Jude, just to check in on the time here, we're about 5 minutes till 10. So
okay.
We got some good questions as well. So we'll leave some time. I'm just going to let you go.
We've got to 10:30 though, right?
Yeah, the whole session ends at 10:30.
Okay.
We got
Okay.
yeah, good.
Okay, super. So at the time of farrowing, this is a photograph I took. Actually, I took this last winter. It was really cold, and you can see the back window is frosty on the hut. But at the time of farrowing, we watch the sow, but we don't disturb her. And we don't go inside the house during the first few days, unless the sow has already come out on her own, which she often does. And we then castrate let's say day 4 to day 6. And for us to do castration, we castrate by feeding the sows in the morning. And then when the sow is outside eating, we come into the house, and there's a lot of ways to do this. I mean, some people want to get the piglets out. These huts that I have, if I back up to this picture, you can sort of see on the top of that, I might have a better photo of this, but the huts have a door that's like, it doesn't have hinges. It has like spring-loaded pegs. And you can put that door on the front and lock yourself in the house, and then you're safe from any angry sows. So that's how we do our castrations. So just talking a little bit about pre-wean mortality, which is a big issue. It's been a big challenge for me over the years, and I'm sure it's a big challenge for you guys. But we try to use data to help us make decisions rather than your anecdotal memory or your emotions, because it's really sows who have shown themselves not to be good mothers and lay on too many pigs. You really can't afford to keep them on your farm. They really can't be there. And I know this is a point of departure. It's a point of philosophical departure from the indoor farrowing crate confinement farm, who can probably keep sows for other reasons, even if they maybe are sows who would otherwise lay on pigs. But when you're using a farrowing pen with straw or a farrowing hut in a field, you really have to select for sows who can raise their pigs. And I'm convinced it's a maternal behavior that's inherited and sometimes maybe even learned. I'm not sure about the learned part, but it could be learned. And you need to select aggressively based on data, away from sows who cannot raise these pigs in a straw system. And something you can do though in the short term is we found it to take one of these big, like heavy, not like a leaf rake for your yard, but a heavy like dirt rake for your garden, and carry it along on our four-wheeler and go to the front door of the house after you put feed outside and the sow leaves the house. So this is an example of a hut that needs to be raked, because you can sort of see there's it's like mountains and valleys in there. Like on the left side, you have the straw piled up so high, and on the right side, it's like a down in a hole, right? So that needs to be raked level, because the piglets, I'm sure this is making it hard for them to move around. So again, this takes time, but we think it pays. If you level the straw in your house once a day during that first week, let's say, after farrowing. And one other thing is this sounds maybe a little silly, but it needs to be quiet. One time I noticed I was using a string trimmer, trying to cut weeds around the electric fence, and the sows got so upset from the string trimmer. And then we decided to stop loud engines, loud tractors, string trimmers, chainsaws, whatever, when pigs are small. I don't have any data on that, but I think it's something that you might try to do. So one thing is that I've found, this is the last slide, and we were going to allow about a half an hour for questions, or we can go back to other slides if you guys want. But sharing my experiences with other farmers is one of the central things about doing this, because I think something Iowa has going for it is this sort of egalitarian sense of sharing, and maybe that sounds corny, but I mean, where would I be without the ability to stand on the shoulders of farmers who came before me and learn from them? Because it costs a lot and it takes a long time to learn these things. And I feel like I would have been farther along in my career if I would have listened to some things I was told 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And that's probably part of life, is having to learn on your own, I guess. We all have to learn on our own the hard way sometimes. But sometimes I get calls from farmers in other states and I shouldn't pick on other states, but I will a little bit. And they have this mentality like it's a secret. Everything is a secret. And if you tell me something, I'm going to benefit from that, but I'm not going to tell anyone else. So I really think that things like the Practical Farmers of Iowa and Moses and these conferences, this is part of farming, is learning and then sharing it. There's this word in German, Heimat, which is, it's one of these words that we don't have in English. It means like coming home to your own group, to your family, but also your extended family. And when those extended family have a kind of harmony and synergy, and you can see how English is taking too long to explain the one word Heimat, but anyway, it's Heimat for me to try to share this stuff with you guys, because then we're all way better off, and it's anything we could gain by keeping this knowledge to ourselves as a secret is really, it's not much in comparison to what we can gain by sharing and receiving this knowledge from other farmers. So that's my presentation about my planning and everything. I know there's a lot of topics here, but I probably hit some of them too fast. And but I guess if you guys have any questions on any of the points, I can go back and explain more, or anything else, I guess, on this topic.
There's a fair number of questions here, Jude, and so and thank you. This has been amazing. I really like this last slide because it gives you a sense of how you've set your farrowing houses or your huts up out in your field. So what I'm going to go through here, Jude, is these questions that have come through, and they sort of flow from how you presented your information in terms of the front to the back. And then I'm sure there'll be more that are going to be coming. Here we go. Okay, on the AI, I was under the impression that it's hard to catch pigs in heat. Can you give them, and you talked a bit about, using a boar to stimulate and stuff like that. Can you give shots to bring them into heat, or is this a thing that you can do in pigs? And is it legal in terms of the organic system?
So that's a good question. So you can use something called PG600, which is a hormone. There are probably some other ones. I don't know all the latest hormones that are available to give, but we don't do that. We're certified organic, so we're not allowed to do that. And I don't want to do that. I feel like it's not needed to do that. It's not necessary because what are these critical parameters that I showed the slide where it says there are about 5 days from when you wean a sow until she comes in heat, right? And if the question is asking, is it difficult to find them in heat? And my answer is it shouldn't be. Sometimes with gilts it is. Gilts can be difficult to find for a human being to find their heat. It can be difficult. And that's why we have a boar for some of these gilts. The boar can find that heat, probably through smell and pheromones that are being released. But even in that situation, if a boar finds a gilt in heat difficult to find, then I can I take my red plastic sorting panel and like safely and carefully push the boar off the gilt's back. And then she's already standing. So then I can use my catheter and breed her at that time. So, and maybe I'm making it sound too easy, but it's something you just need to sort of try it a few times and get an experience of it. And if you're nervous about it, maybe have a boar and watch the boar and just sort of be there and say, okay, maybe there's three sows in this pen and I've got a boar breeding one. Well, you know what? There's a second sow in heat, and I'm just going to try to use my catheter and my semen tube and practice like this. Mm-hmm. And maybe if I fail, maybe the boar will breed her tonight anyway, and it won't cost me anything that way. And so there are ways to sort of slowly start to get experience without having to risk a lot of loss of money or mistakes.
Do you ever save back gilts, or do you always bring in your new females from elsewhere? And there's another follow-up question which is asked in a couple of different places. How long are your sows, like how many litters before they're done? I mean, how long the longevity of your herd? Yeah.
So the saving back gilts, we have tried that a few times over the years, and I have to tell you, I haven't done a very good job at that. We're trying it again as we speak. We've got another batch of gilts that have been born recently from a specific boar I chose. That's not a Berkshire, but in fact was a Chester white boar that I bought semen from a boar stud with the idea of making these gilts. Because remember, if you save back gilts, then you need to find another boar to get away from inbreeding. And then So it gets a little complicated. And what I'm getting at here is it's almost another job. So I've started to notice that farms who save back their own gilts tend to be farms who are already in the business of selling gilts. And then they become a multiplier farm. So it's sort of like the argument for specialization. In other words, what is your job? Are you raising pigs to sell for meat, or are you a reproduction multiplier farm? But having said all that, there is an argument to be made for saving back your own gilts. Wendell Berry had a classic paper called "Let the Farm Decide," in which he advocates for the great benefits of raising livestock from within. In other words, it's a kind of you might say holistic concept that or biodynamic concept, or even to use the word organic from Howard, the Englishman Howard, who came up with the term organic. It's like an organism that sustains itself, right? So gilts who are born on the farm should therefore be having the right health, the right behavioral traits to succeed because they evolved out of that farm. So there are two ways to look at that. And then it's in terms of the longevity of the sows, it depends. I mean, I have some sows here who I call my queens, who are, 12 and 13 and 14 litter sows. And then
Wow.
some don't last that long. Some gilts get pregnant once, have one litter of pigs, and never get pregnant again, sadly. So that there's a variation. I think 2 to 3 years is a good number, because the other thing, when you use the word last, how long does a sow last? Part of that has to be how heavy is she? Because sows through time it's like a linear increase in body mass, right? And there comes a point where it's, again, like I say, you have to use data versus emotions, because she might have been very successful and had 5 or 6 really good litters of pigs, or maybe 7 or 8 good litters of pigs. But, oh my goodness, she weighs 550 pounds. And that means that the amount of feed she takes is too much, frankly. And more important than that, the amount of space she occupies inside the farrowing pen becomes too great as a proportion to the farrowing pen itself. And then the crushing increases because of that. So, yeah.
There's a number of questions that are on this kind of theme here, and then there's a number of questions that are going to be about your pasture farrowing system. Okay. But let me go through these that are about this whole your comment that some gilts don't care for their baby pigs is interesting. Do you choose gilts from herds that have pen farrowing type systems as opposed to crate? Are mothering abilities a learned trait? So you see what they're trying to get at there in terms of like.
Yeah. So, okay. So I wish that we had the luxury to choose gilts from a farm which was doing outdoor production or pen farrowing. I don't know of any multiplier herds that are selling gilts like that. Yeah. And I wish. So we don't have that choice. Now in Denmark, a study has been done. They've created some multiplier herds that are only pen farrowing with straw. And they are now selling gilts to farms who are organic or farms who are doing crate-free systems. And they are seeing that it, in fact, mothering is a learned trait.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good. Let's go. What is an old sow? We asked that. What's your culling policy? I think you said they get too big.
Yeah.
Or whatever reason. Do you have a market for those animals, the culled sows and the gilts?
So yeah, again, I wish we had a market for that, but we don't, that I know of. I've been trying for 3 years to get a local processor to make sausage that my intention was just to use my sows and then market that sausage, because as a kind of pasture raised, sort of pasture kept, because those gilts didn't come from organic farms, so they couldn't be organic sows, but still I feel like it has value because of the way they've lived and the quality of their meat. But I haven't been able to find a processor to do that, and I don't know of any markets for that.
So they're sold conventionally, typically.
Yes, they're sold conventionally.
So your baby pigs are 6 weeks nursing on the sows. So how's that compared to conventional? And what's the benefits of the longer nursing? And I've heard conventional have moved to longer nursing because it helps wean pigs transition to eating feed and staying alive. So anyway.
So the question on the duration of lactation is a good one. So actually, we actually have just recently increased. So I've gone, when I wrote these slides, I was still doing 6 weeks, and we decided last month, because I felt like my wean pigs are still not as strong and robust as I want them to be, I increased to 8 weeks of lactation. And I can't tell you what the results are yet, but the indoor farms are typically 17 days, segregated early weaning, 21 days, 28 days. This would be a long time for an indoor farm.
Yeah.
And the benefits to doing that are obviously pigs per sow per year, because you can get more farrowings per year per sow by cheating on, sort of, I say cheating, but you're manipulating the calendar. And so with my system, you get about 2 litters per sow per year. With 6 weeks, I guess with 8 weeks, you're getting a little less, but and so it's the advantage to having the longer lactation is obviously the pigs get bigger and bigger and get closer and closer to a point where they would wean themselves naturally. And during that time, they're continuing to absorb what I call passive immunity, even though the amount of milking is dropping through those days. They're still getting that magical passive immunity.
Interesting. There's a question going back to the gilts and the breeding and the cycling. If you want to AI gilts and you have a boar across the fence to help detect her, do gilts cycle exactly every 21 days from that starting heat point? Is that
they should, they do, and I know it seems frustrating, but they should, and most 90% or more will. It's just detecting it, because it can be, and this is something weird, but in the Midwestern states, it's harder than other states because there's PRRS everywhere here. And people who are raising pigs in Texas or California or Oregon, I'm talking to a guy now from British Columbia, they seem to have an easier time with this because they're not fighting an environment that contains PRRS.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, here's one that may be related to something that came earlier. What's your finished weight goal for your market hogs? I mean, what size are those pig?
So the market hogs from our farm are about 270 to 280 pounds. The reason for that is the market continues to look for, my customers are looking for bigger and bigger hams.
Yeah,
that seems to be a driving thing, and yeah.
Yeah. What vaccinations do you do on your sows and the pigs?
So our vaccine program is designed specifically for us. Your own program on your farm will be your own program, but our program is we're now using a live PRRS vaccine, which some people may not like. But it's actually helped us. We haven't had an outbreak of PRRS here in 4 years.
Nice.
Because of this Fostera live PRRS vaccine, and we're using a product like a Farrowsure product, which is kind of a generic. There are other ones, Litter Guard, which cover like Bratislava, all those sorts of things, E. coli, Lepto, Parvo, which is in this Farrowsure product. We have an autogenous vaccine, which just means we've made it ourselves, that my vet makes based on some streps he's found on my farm.
And you're only doing the breeding herd at this point in terms of your vaccination, as opposed
We
to
vaccinate the piglets at weaning time, also with autogenous vaccine and mycoplasma and erysipelas.
Wow.
And one more.
And vaccination is as opposed to using antibiotics, is okay within an organic production system.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Has your operation changed with climate change? How has your operation changed with climate change?
Well, what I experience is that we have more and more extreme events. Okay, and so you have to become more resilient. You have to plan for extreme events. And I used to tell myself, it was a kind of self therapy, like after a bad storm or something happened. Oh yeah, that sucked, but it was just a one-off event. It's never going to happen again. That's not good enough anymore. Like I have to prepare myself for extreme events to become regular events. And that's easier said than done. So we just have to find more robust housing options. We have to find more robust machinery solutions. We have to be creative. One thing we're doing now is planting more trees on the farm all the time, these poplar trees in rows and windbreaks, trying to stop the wind, buffer the wind, create more shade. We've been toying with setting these big sow huts that are 10 by 20 feet on top of a farrowing hut. So if it's really cold, it's like an igloo within an igloo. So it keeps the body heat in.
Interesting. That's nice that you're actually realizing that this needs to be addressed as opposed to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Do the groups of sows, when you move them to the farrowing area, do they group together in one hut to stay warm? And then do they move to another hut to farrow? How does that, it looks like from your picture here that they have their own little space, but how does that work?
Yeah. So when we move them to the farrowing area, the sow just goes into her house and she lives there for like a week or more, or 10 days before she farrows. And sometimes we don't have enough spaces, so we have 2 huts or sometimes 3 in wintertime. And then we have to be more careful because the sow will they should choose a hut to farrow in. Sometimes gilts will go two gilts to one house because they're used to sleeping together as litter mates. You need to physically separate them and then lock the door a couple days before they farrow, otherwise they'll farrow together. And once they farrow in the hut, they stay there. We don't,
Interesting. How do you get out of the hut after you're done castrating with an angry sow at the front door?
Well, I have somebody helping me, and we have somebody outside all the time that has a plastic red sorting panel to help me, get out. Otherwise, that would not be safe. But one thing we're doing now is another thing we're doing is we have this red steel box I constructed for my tractor 3-point hitch, and I back up to the hut. And that's actually, I'm finding a better solution. So the next time if I do this presentation again, I might take a photograph of that red box, sort of like a safety cage to work inside of. Yeah.
Sounds like a reality TV show to me. But
yeah.
Okay, what does your winter setup look like for your sows? All outside, but how can you put an electric fence up with 3 foot of snow? And you farrow during the polar vortex. No frozen pigs.
So I don't have any slides of that in this one, but we have the same setup. So the water fountains that you see there in that photograph right now, I have since buried the water lines on my farm. So the watering works all the time. The electric fence is the trick. You've got to invest in the biggest fencer that you can possibly get from the company called Premier One in Southeast Iowa. I'm not being paid by them, but that's just what you have to buy. Don't buy these local hobby farm fences because they just don't have it. They cannot maintain voltage in extreme conditions. And that's an investment. And there's lots of other tricks to how to correctly build a fence. I have people ask me questions about their fence. My fence isn't working. What should I do? And 7 or 8 times out of 10, the fence is not properly grounded. You need to have like 6 feet or 12 feet of ground rod deep down in the ground, depending on how much clay or sand you have in your soil. And if your fence is not grounded properly, when it gets cold outside, it won't work right. Or if it's too dry, it won't work right either. So that's the fencing question. The farrowing question, like I say, is these huts are another investment that I couldn't do what I do with wooden huts or homemade huts. These are very well built, and we use lots of straw. And we now, when it's really, really cold, this year we luckily missed the vortex period, but 2 years ago we had it, and we put these big huts, we set them on top of the farrowing huts. And that actually worked because it kept off the cold. And I know a sow produces 1 kilowatt of heat per hour. And if you can maintain that body heat inside a small isolated space, it's enough.
Two questions then. The watering system, do your waterers stand up? You buried the line, but how do you keep the water in the actual?
No, the waters that I have there, again, those are not the waters I have right. This picture's a number of years old, but we have insulated water fountains that have a heater on them.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah.
And did you import those from England in pieces, or how did you get them over?
Yeah, so yeah, the huts come in flat, they're flat packed, and you can put them together with bolts. They have a front, a back, 2 sides, and 1 top. And pretty efficient, actually.
Okay. It would take a whole container to get them over here put together. Have you ever used rubber mats on the ground inside the hut? It's a great insulator.
We've tried things like that, and none of them have worked. And I've just gone back to straw, like laying down a wafer from a 3x3 foot bale or a 3x4 foot bale is like it's like a carpet. If you you get good at doing these things, like you set that bale out in the middle of a line of like 4 or 5 huts in that picture, and you carry 1 wafer and set it down, and then you put the next one in. 2 wafers should be enough. And if it's about 6 to 8 inches thick, that's perfect to start. And that acts itself as an insulator against the ground. And at the time, we don't move these huts. We keep it on the same spot. And yeah, last week we had to manually fork out a lot of straw with a silage rake, and that sucked, but we just had to do it.
This one, I think we already asked the question of the steel water tanks. How do you keep them heated in the winter? And you say you have heating units in them with electricity. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. How many farrowing paddocks do you have, and what do you seed after they leave? And where do the piglets get weaned? And where do the piglets get weaned to? Or do you move the sow and let the pigs stay in the pen? Or how does that all work?
So we have 2 farrowing paddocks, because at any one time in my system, there are 2 groups of sows occupying the farrowing area. So every sow, I allocate 6 sows per acre. That's how I laid. So every one of these paddocks is approximately 1/6 of an acre if it has 1 sow in it. And then we stay on the same field for the season. And then when fall comes, I pick all this stuff up and move it all away. And I have another field which has been pre-seeded in grass, and a mix of, it's just a forage mix that works on my farm. I've experimented with different clovers, annual ryegrass, Sudan grass. And you can just have to experiment on your farm with what forage mixes works for you guys. And when we farrow there, I forget the last part of your comment there, Gary.
Well, do you take the sows out and leave the pigs on pasture, or what do you do with the baby pigs?
No. So we have a hydraulic cart, like a trailer, that we back up to every hut on Thursday morning of the weaning week. And then we shoo the pigs onto the cart with the sow at the same time. And we drive into my yard and we take the sow off the cart and put her in the hoop building I use for artificial insemination, where she then comes in heat. And then the piglets stay on that cart, and we go to another area where I have a nursery set up and put them in the nursery.
I see. That's how that works.
That's at 6 weeks of age.
Are all semen businesses the same? Do some have better quality than others?
Oh yeah. There are some studs out there that I would be wary of, and you need to ask around for references on some of these boar studs, because the quality of the collection and storage and preservation, there's a huge amount of variability in that.
The gilts you buy, not certified organic, or are there certified organic gilt multipliers?
There are no certified organic gilt multipliers I know of. Now, having said that, I'm sure there are probably some farms, for example, in the organic prairie pool, I would venture to guess, who might have their own gilts and maybe they trade amongst themselves. But besides that, there's really no official gilt multipliers that I know of.
What does PRRS do?
PRRS is an acronym, Porcine Reproductive and Respiratory Syndrome. It's been around since the 70s. It's really been the bane of pork production in the United States and Europe. It can cause, mainly it causes reproductive problems such as low, like a poor heat, or just infertility.
Is it a virus then?
It's a virus. Sorry, yeah, it's a virus, and
Okay.
it's very easily spread. It's ubiquitous throughout the countryside. Yeah, and it's a big problem.
Is there a vaccine for it? You said you.
So there are better vaccines for PRRS now. There are better ones than there were even 10 years ago, and we have this one from Fostera, which is a live vaccine, which some people don't like to use, but I found the killed vaccines weren't very effective at stopping it. And luckily, we haven't had any outbreaks here in a few years.
So then the farrowing huts are empty. We're talking about this whole weaning thing again. And for how many weeks between farrowings to the next sow are those huts empty? Let me read that again. So then the farrowing huts are empty for how many weeks between weaning and the next sow?
Okay, so yeah, so the farrowing hut, the longer it's empty, the better it is in terms of hygiene. If you're talking about all in, all out systems. So we have an extra, let's say, allocation of huts for that reason. Because when I started doing this, I just bought enough huts to barely make it work, sort of. But then you're putting a sow in the same hut immediately after, and it's not good. So we found that although you can wash these huts out with a power washer, that's not very practical. So we simply pick it up, move it to a new spot on the ground, and then the old bedding pack we pick up with a skid loader, take it away, and the sunshine will then sanitize that area of the pasture. And we let like a month go by, because that also helps the grass reestablish itself. You've really got to allow enough area of your pasture to keep this nice green look. Otherwise you denude your landscape, and it really becomes a problem for soil erosion and parasites and all sorts of things.
This looks like that's the last question because we're 2 minutes away from 10:30, but it's related to what you just talked about. What are your soil types? My farm can be quite wet with heavier clay soils. Would this not be a good site for pasture pigs?
Yeah, so soil site selection is a big deal. So you want to avoid like the worst soil is like obviously low bottom soil, or like black, like prairie pothole type, really black, like silty soil. So clay can be okay. Well, I have clay loam soils in my farm. And what we've done is actually build a road. So I build a road in the middle of, if I go back to the very beginning of this, so not the beginning, right there, there's my road. On the right-hand side and the left-hand side of that road are farrowing paddocks. And you can that road anytime.
And you got gravel down there too, huh?
Yes, gravel. Yep.
Well, Jude, I think that's well, that's perfect. No more questions, and it's 10:29.
Okay, great.
I want to thank you so much. You're going to unshare your screen now because I'm going to put up an ending slide.
Okay.
So why don't you do that? But I really appreciate you taking the time.
Great.
You got a great thing going on there.
Thank you.
And you've been doing it for what, 20 years now?
Yeah, time flies. Yeah.
So really appreciate you taking the time. I'm thankful for our attendees as well. It's a little odd to not know who you all are and how many there are, but I think this went quite well. We're at the last day of the conference, so it's a beautiful day outside. I hope you all get to enjoy it. And thank you, Jude, and Wendy
thank you, everyone.
has been in the background. and helping us with the questions. So that's it. I'm going to put up a ending slide. I'm going to share my screen and get that going. And then you can leave our meeting now, Jude, if you want.
Okay. Okay.
Hopefully I won't see you. Hopefully I see you before 10 years passes again.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. And I'll get the what I need to get up here. Thanks, everybody.